There are things a woman can survive: death, poverty, loneliness. But a secret can outlive you. My name doesn't matter much anymore. Around here, I'm just Miss June, the woman with white hair who still tends the same rose bush her husband planted 40 years ago. People see me on my porch and wave like they always have, never guessing that inside this house sits the truth that cracked my family in half. It wasn't murder or money or madness. It was love. The wrong kind kept quiet for too long. It began the summer of 1987, though the fallout didn't come until the early 2000s. By then, my children had grown, my husband had passed, and my grandchildren filled the silence he left behind. But even joy can't grow where roots are rotten. The secret lived under our roof long before anyone knew to name it. Back then, my daughter Claire was 16, wild-spirited, beautiful, and stubborn like her daddy. Her younger brother Paul was 13, bright but quiet, always drawing at the kitchen table instead of playing ball outside. I thought I was doing right by keeping peace in the house, by looking the other way when arguments got too loud, by believing that silence could protect what love could not. I was wrong. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong was the night Claire didn't come home. It was after midnight, rain against the windows, the kind of storm that makes the whole town feel smaller. I sat up on the couch with the lamp on, her untouched dinner cold on the table, when she finally walked in, hair soaked, mascara streaked and shaken. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She went straight to her room and locked the door. The next morning, she told me she was fine. And I believed her, because that's what mothers do when the truth is too heavy to hold.
For weeks after that, something in her changed. She stopped going to church. She stopped talking to Paul. She'd spend hours in her room with the window open, staring at nothing. I told myself it was just teenage moods, heartbreak maybe, but there were nights I'd hear her crying into her pillow, whispering, "I can't tell her." Tell me in the comments, have you ever heard someone say something in their sleep that haunted you more than the truth ever could? A few months later, I found a letter in the laundry basket, folded in half, written in her handwriting. It wasn't addressed to anyone. "Mama, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want it. Please don't hate me." I sat down on the floor right there between the towels and cried, but I didn't confront her. I couldn't, because in this town, a woman's reputation was her only shield, and my daughter was already breaking under what I didn't understand. So I hid the letter, tucked it in my Bible, and with it, I hid the truth that would one day destroy everything. Years passed. Claire left home, got married, had children of her own. She became the mother I once was, tired, careful, smiling through what hurt. But I could see the same silence living behind her eyes. And when her eldest son, my grandson, Ethan, was born, something about him felt familiar. His eyes, the shape of his smile, a resemblance I couldn't name out loud without tearing open the past. So I didn't. I told myself the past had died in that house back in '87. But secrets don't die. They wait. And one day, they come home wearing your grandson's face.
By the time Ethan turned 12, the whole town knew him as June's pride. Smart, kind, with that same quiet strength his grandfather used to have. He'd sit on my porch after school, drawing pictures of the hills and the lake, just like my son Paul used to. Some afternoons, I'd look at him and feel something warm and painful rise in my chest, a strange mix of love and guilt, because I knew what no one else did. Ethan wasn't just my grandson. He was also my son's child. It had taken me years to put the pieces together. The night Claire came home crying, the letter, the silence between her and Paul that never healed. The moment I saw Ethan's baby picture, it all fell into place like a cruel puzzle I'd been pretending didn't exist. Paul had moved away after high school, couldn't stand to stay in town. He wrote once a year, short notes, never about the past. Claire never mentioned him, not once. When Ethan was born, I asked Claire who the father was. She said the man's name so quickly, it sounded rehearsed. A name no one in town had ever met. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I already knew. I lived with that knowledge like a ghost in the house. It whispered through family dinners and echoed in every photograph I took down from the walls. No one else saw it, or maybe they chose not to look, because that's how small towns work. We don't lie, exactly. We just agree not to look too closely. When my husband, Walter, was alive, I thought about telling him. I almost did once, the night of our 40th anniversary. He was sitting on the porch swing, humming an old tune, holding my hand. He said, "You ever feel like we raised a storm, June? Like our kids were the lightning?" I remember opening my mouth to speak, to say yes, and I kept the thunder quiet. But the words died there, because saying them would have meant admitting I failed as a mother, and I wasn't ready for that. So I did what generations of women before me did. I called my silence protection. I told myself I was saving them from shame, that I was preserving what little good we had left. But silence doesn't save families. It starves them. Tell me in the comments, have you ever kept something to protect someone, only to realize it hurt everyone instead? The years went by. Claire raised Ethan and his younger sister Lily. They lived 2 streets over, and Sunday dinners became our ritual. We'd eat roast chicken, talk about work, school, and pretend the past never existed. But one evening, Ethan asked a question that stopped my heart. He said, "Grandma, why don't I have a grandpa on Mom's side? Uncle Paul said Grandpa Walter is not my real one." I froze. Claire went pale. And in that instant, I saw 40 years of silence balancing on a single truth I couldn't hold back much longer. That night, after they left, I went into the attic and found the letter again, the one I'd hidden in my Bible all those years ago. The ink had faded, but the pain hadn't. "Mama, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want it. Please don't hate me." I sat there under that single attic bulb and finally cried the way I hadn't let myself in decades. Not because of what happened, but because of what I didn't do. I didn't protect her. I didn't protect him. And now that silence was growing roots in the next generation. The next morning, I called Claire, told her we needed to talk, really talk. She hesitated, then agreed to come by after church. When she arrived, she looked older than her years, the same way I had once looked at her age. She sat across from me at the table, hands folded, eyes tired. I placed the letter on the table between us. She stared at it for a long time. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "You knew." And that's when the truth I had buried for 20 years finally rose to the surface, shaking, trembling, begging to be spoken. Claire didn't cry right away. She just sat there, staring at that folded piece of paper like it was alive. Her fingers brushed against the edge, then pulled back, as if touching it might burn her. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded like it had been buried for years. "Why didn't you say anything, Mama?" And that single question broke something I'd been holding together for half my life. I was scared, I told her. Scared of what people would say. Scared of what it would do to you, to him, to all of us. She laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was the kind of laugh that shakes more than it releases. "Mama, what they said couldn't have been worse than what it did to me." Then the tears came. Not the loud kind, but the slow, trembling kind that sound like truth finally leaking out. She told me what I had only ever guessed, that it had happened when I wasn't home, that she was too young and too ashamed to tell me, that Paul had left because he couldn't bear what he'd done or what he turned her into in this town's eyes. She said she thought I knew, that every silence, every look I gave her in those years felt like judgment disguised as mercy. And in that moment, I realized something I will never forget. Forgiveness delayed is still forgiveness denied. We sat at that table until the sun started to fade, two women carrying one wound between them. For the first time since 1987, I reached across and took her hand. It felt small again, like when she was a child who trusted me to make things right. I said, "I should have protected you, even from him." And she whispered, "I should have told you, even when it hurt." The house went quiet after that, the kind of quiet that feels holy. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. That night, after she left, I went into my late husband's old room. The air still smelled faintly of tobacco and pine cleaner. I took out a box from the closet, the one marked family. Inside were photographs, old letters, birthday cards, and a single envelope I hadn't seen before. It was addressed to me, in Paul's handwriting. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 10 years earlier.
Mama, I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope one day you understand. I left because I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Not after what I did. Not after what she looked like when she realized it. I see him in my dreams. The boy. I know what I took from both of you. I can't come home, but I hope you remember me the way I was before the storm. I read that line over and over. Before the storm. And I thought about how storms don't end. They just move from one life to the next, changing shape but never really gone. Tell me in the comments, have you ever kept quiet so long that even truth started to sound like a lie? I folded the letter back and placed it beside Claire's. Two confessions written in the same ink, carrying the same pain. Mother and son, both asking for something I could never give fully: redemption. For the first time, I realized the secret hadn't destroyed my family because of what it was, but because of how I carried it. It wasn't the truth that broke us. It was my silence. Weeks passed. Claire came by often after that. We didn't talk much about the past. Sometimes forgiveness grows better in quiet. But I noticed a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, as if she'd finally stopped running from her own reflection. One afternoon,
Ethan stopped by after school. He was almost 16 then, tall, thoughtful, too wise for his age. He helped me prune the roses out back and asked if he could stay the weekend. When he smiled, I saw Paul again, and my heart ached in a way that felt almost holy, like grief and grace sitting side by side. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat by the window with the 2 letters in my lap. I whispered a prayer, not for God to erase the past, but to let it rest. Because some things aren't meant to be forgotten. They're meant to be remembered differently. When people say time heals all wounds, I think they mean the surface, the skin of a life. But what lives underneath, the memory, the guilt, the echo, time doesn't erase that. It just teaches you how to hold it without shaking. It's been almost 20 years since that afternoon at my kitchen table when I told my daughter I knew. And somehow we're still here. Different, quieter, but still here. Ethan's grown now. He's 27, lives 3 towns over, teaches art at the community center. He comes by twice a month to mow the lawn, check the gutters, make sure Grandma June's roof doesn't leak. He doesn't know the truth, not the whole of it anyway. Claire and I agreed long ago that the past would stop with us, not out of shame, but mercy. Because sometimes protecting the next generation means letting them live free of the shadows you built. Every so often, I catch him smiling a certain way, and it takes my breath away. It's Paul's smile. I still keep both letters tucked in my Bible, the one from my daughter and the one from my son. I read them once a year, not to punish myself, but to remember the cost of silence. A few years back, Claire and I went to visit Paul's grave. He died alone in another state, working as a mechanic. A heart attack, they said. Too young, too soon, too far. She stood there, one hand on the headstone, and said, "I forgive you, Paul." Then she looked at me and whispered, "And I forgive you too, Mama." And just like that, decades of heaviness lifted, not gone, but light enough to breathe again. If you're still here, tell me, have you ever realized that forgiveness doesn't rewrite what happened? It just stops it from owning you? That night, when we got home, I sat on my porch as the sun went down. The sky burned gold, then violet, then soft gray, the way it always does when the world forgives itself for another day. I thought about how one secret had traveled through 3 generations, reshaping every person it touched. And yet, here we were, still finding ways to love each other, despite the cracks. Maybe that's all a family really is. Not perfection, not innocence. Just a group of souls trying to love each other through what they've broken. These days, my life is simple again. I bake bread on Sundays, feed the birds, and water the same roses that bloomed beside my husband's grave 40 years ago. Sometimes Claire joins me on the porch. Sometimes Ethan brings his students to paint the garden. And in those moments, when laughter fills the air, when light touches the petals, I think, maybe the secret didn't destroy us after all. It only forced us to face who we really were. I keep the 2 letters inside the family Bible still, not as evidence, but as prayer. A reminder that even buried truth can become a seed if you let it. And every night before bed, I whisper the same words I said to myself when I finally told the truth. You can't undo what silence did, but you can refuse to be quiet anymore. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.